The Haunted Land, the forgotten history of Hollow Creek Farm prologue. The silence that screams. There are places the earth refuses to forget. Places where the past doesn't die, it just waits. Hollow Creek Farm is one of those places. Nestled in the forgotten heart of the countryside, surrounded by dense forests and a stream that never stops whispering, the farm has remained abandoned for almost 50 years. Broken windows gaze out like empty eyes. Peeling walls hold secrets no one wants to hear. And at night, say the residents of the nearest town, the lights still stay on in the upper rooms. But nobody lives there. Nobody has lived there for decades. This is the story they tried to erase from the records. This is the truth they buried along with the bodies. Sarah Drummond never imagined she would inherit an estate. At 32, she worked as an archivist in Chicago, lived alone with her 2 cats, and her life was as predictable as the seasons. Until that gray Tuesday in October, when the lawyer called. "Miss Drummond? This is Marcus Welch from the law firm Welch and Associates. I'm calling about an inheritance left by your great-aunt, Eliza Drummond." Sarah frowned. "Excuse me, but I think there's been a mistake. I don't have. She passed away 3 weeks ago. And she left you Hollow Creek Farm, including all the land and buildings." The name meant nothing to Sarah. Her family was small, scattered, full of gaps and silences. Her mother had died when she was only 8 years old, and her father never spoke about the past. But a farm? Land? That could change everything. 2 weeks later, Sarah was driving along increasingly narrow roads, leaving civilization behind. The GPS had stopped working miles ago. Her cell phone had no signal. Only trees, denser and darker, even though it was the middle of the afternoon. When he finally arrived, his heart tightened. Hollow Creek Farm loomed on the horizon like an open wound in the landscape. The main house, a 3-story Victorian building, leaned slightly to the left, as if collapsing in slow motion. The barn in the background had half its roof gone. And there were other buildings, small cabins scattered across the property, all in ruins. But what disturbed Sarah the most was the silence. No birds sang. No insects buzzed. Only the wind, dragging dry leaves across the hard-packed earthen floor. She got out of the car, clutching the keys the lawyer had given her. The front door was ajar, creaking softly. Sarah pushed it open, and the smell hit her like a punch. Mold, decay, and something else. Something sweet and terrible that she couldn't quite put her finger on. The entrance hall was covered in dust. Old furniture, draped in yellowed sheets, looked like ghosts frozen in time. Photographs on the walls showed serious faces, eyes that seemed to follow every movement. Sarah recognized some familiar features in the faces, the same jawline, the same deep-set eyes. Your family. One photo in particular caught his attention. A young woman, no more than 20 years old, wearing a white dress, standing in front of the house. She wasn't smiling. Her eyes held an expression of pure terror, as if someone were forcing her to remain motionless for the photograph. On the back, handwritten, "Clara Drummond, 1959. May God have mercy." A shiver ran down Sarah's spine. Sarah decided to spend the night at the farm. It was unwise, she knew, but hotels were hours away, and she needed to assess the property to decide whether it was worth renovating or simply selling the land. She set up an inflatable mattress in the living room, next to the unlit fireplace. Her flashlight cast dancing shadows on the walls. The silence was oppressive, almost solid, pressing against her ears. Then, at 11:47 p.m., she checked the clock. The noises started. First, there were footsteps. Slow, deliberate, coming from the upper floor. Sarah froze, her heart racing. "Is anyone there?" she cried, her voice weak and frightened. The footsteps stopped. Then left, low, childlike, coming from somewhere deep within the house. Sarah grabbed the flashlight and stood up, every cell in her body screaming at her to run. But she couldn't. She shouldn't. It was just the noises of an old house, she convinced herself. Creaking wood. Rats. But mice don't laugh. The laughter turned to sobs. A muffled, desperate sob came from upstairs. Sarah climbed the stairs slowly, each step groaning beneath her feet. The second-floor hallway stretched in darkness, doors closed on both sides. A door at the end of the corridor was ajar. The flashlight's light flickered in Sarah's hand as she approached. "Hello." Her voice was just a whisper now. She pushed the door open. The room was empty. Peeling walls, a broken crib in the corner, old toys scattered on the floor. But what made Sarah recoil was the wall at the back. It was covered in scratches. Hundreds, thousands of marks, as if someone had repeatedly and desperately dug their fingernails into the wood. And amidst the scratches, words engraved. "Help us, he comes at night. We are not free." Sarah ran out of the room, stumbled down the stairs, and only stopped when she was outside the house, breathing in the cold night air. Her hands trembled. Tears streamed down her face without her realizing it. Something was terribly wrong in that house. And then she saw lights in the third-floor windows. Lights that blinked in a pattern, as if someone were turning a flashlight on and off. But she was alone. She was sure of it, wasn't it? Sarah didn't sleep that night. At dawn, she drove to the nearest town, Millbrook, a community of 800 people where everyone knew everyone else. She needed answers. The local library was a low brick building run by an elderly lady named Agnes, who wore thick glasses and smelled of lavender. "Hollow Creek," Agnes repeated, her face instantly hardening. "Why do you want to know about that place?" "I inherited the property. I'm from the Drummond family." The silence that followed was heavy. Agnes looked around, making sure they were alone, and then leaned over the counter. "Child, you need to sell that land and never go back there again." "But what happened?" Agnes sighed, as if she were carrying a terrible weight. "Come with me." She led Sarah to a basement filled with old files. She pulled out a dusty box labeled Hollow Creek Confidential. Inside, there were yellowed newspaper clippings, police documents, and disturbing photographs. "It all started in 1958, Agnes began, her voice low and trembling. Her great-great-grandfather, Nathaniel Drummond, bought that land for an absurdly low price. People said the land was cursed, that the Native Americans who lived there before had been massacred on the site. But Nathaniel didn't believe in superstitions. She handed Sarah a photo. Nathaniel Drummond was an imposing man, with a thick mustache and cruel eyes. He started building the farm, but he needed workers. He brought in poor families, immigrants, desperate people. He promised work, housing, food. But what did he really do? Agnes paused, swallowing hard. He enslaved them. Literally. He locked the families in the huts at night. They worked from dawn till dusk, without pay, without rest. Anyone who tried to escape was hunted down and punished. There were deaths. Many deaths. Sarah felt nausea growing. And there were rumors, Agnes continued, her voice almost a whisper now, of rituals. Nathaniel was obsessed with the occult. They say he performed sacrifices. Children disappeared. The police never investigated. Nathaniel had money, power, connections. And then, Sarah managed to ask. Then, in 1963, it all ended at once. Agnes showed a newspaper headline. Tragedy in Hollow Creek. 23 dead in mysterious fire. The house caught fire. Nathaniel, his wife, and 21 people who worked on the farm died. The only survivor was a 7-year-old girl, Clara Drummond, her great-aunt. Sarah felt the world spin. The woman in the photograph. The terror in her eyes. Clara never spoke about what happened that night. She was sent to an orphanage, then to a psychiatric hospital. She spent her whole life there. When she died, she left everything to you, her only living relative. But why? Why would she leave that for me? Agnes looked at her with an expression that mixed pity and fear. Perhaps she wanted someone to finish what she couldn't. Perhaps she wanted you to free those souls. Sarah returned to Hollow Creek at nightfall, armed with new flashlights, her cell phone fully charged, even without signal, and unwavering determination. If there was something in that land that needed to be revealed, she would find out. She started with the workers' huts. 7 small wooden structures, scattered behind the main house. The first one had its door locked with rusty chains. Sarah used a crowbar to break it open. The smell of death hit her immediately. Inside, she found skeletons. 2 adults and 3 children, still dressed in tattered, rotten clothes. They were embracing, as if they had snuggled together in their last moments of life. Sarah covered her mouth, tears streaming down her face. In the second cabin, more bodies. In the third, even more. None of them had died in the fire. They had been locked up and left to starve to death. Sarah fell to her knees, vomiting. My God, how many people had suffered there? How many souls were still trapped? And then she heard it. Voices. Dozens of them, whispering in unison, "Find him! Find him! Find him! Find whom?" Sarah shouted into the void. "Nathaniel," the voices replied. "He's still here. He never left." Sarah ran back to the main house. If Nathaniel was the key, she needed to find where he was. The basement. It had to be the basement. It was always the basement. The basement door was hidden under a rug in the kitchen. Sarah descended the narrow steps, her flashlight illuminating the damp stone walls. Cobwebs covered every corner. And there, in the center of the basement, stood an altar. Made of bones. Human bones, intertwined in an impossible pattern, formed a table where objects rested. Rusty knives, goblets stained brown with blood, and a book. Sarah picked up the book with trembling hands. The pages were covered in symbols she didn't recognize, but one thing was clear: they were instructions for a ritual. A ritual to trap souls, to steal their lives, to feed something dark and terrible. Nathaniel hadn't just killed those people. He had imprisoned them forever. And in the corner of the cellar, Sarah saw a stone urn. Inside it, ashes. Ashes that still glowed faintly with a sickly red light. The remains of Nathaniel Drummond. As she approached, the voices returned, now a screaming chorus, "Destroy it! Destroy it! Destroy it!" Sarah grabbed the urn. It was warm, pulsing as if it had a heart. She ran upstairs, across the house, out into the yard. The voices followed her, now mixed with maniacal laughter. She threw the urn to the ground with all her might. The stone shattered, and the ashes scattered. Immediately, the earth trembled. An uncanny howl echoed through the farm. And then, Sarah saw spectral figures emerging from the cabins, the barn, the house. Dozens of them. Men, women, children. All translucent, all looking at her with gratitude. And among them, one last figure. The girl who had survived. She smiled at Sarah, for the first time in decades, and then all the figures began to dissipate, rising like smoke toward the night sky. They were free. Sarah sold the land of Hollow Creek Farm to a conservationist who transformed the property into a memorial for the victims. Every name was researched, every story told. The house was demolished, but the cabins remained, transformed into small sanctuaries. Sarah never heard voices again. She never saw ghostly lights again. But sometimes, late at night, when the wind blows just right, she swears she can hear children laughing. Not in despair, but in joy. The souls of Hollow Creek have finally found peace. And the earth, at last, could forget